Hello, and welcome back to Beyond the Transaction, Skies Is the Limit, where we take a deep dive into the colorful world of marketing, branding, and customer experiences. This podcast series delves into transcending mere commercial exchanges and uncovering the stories of individuals who are shaping the way we experience beauty and functionality. Today, we have the privilege of introducing our guest, Dan Johnson, who is redefining with his remarkable venture, Kiosk. In a world where transactions often define our interactions, Dan goes beyond the ordinary. He understands that true value lies not just in the exchange of goods, but in the deeper connection between design, history, and personal expression. Stepping beyond the transaction requires courage, a willingness to explore uncharted territories. With Kiosk, he invites us to break free from the confines of predictable choices and embark on a voyage of discovery. At Kiosk, Dan's expertise and passion converge, resulting in a collection that celebrates the bold and the eccentric. His unique curation transcends the transactional nature of buying furniture, offering a glimpse into a world where pieces embody the essence of timeless design. Each item becomes a story waiting to be told, a testament to the enduring power of creativity and innovation. Beyond the Transaction is not just about unraveling the tales of remarkable individuals like Dan. It's about recognizing the profound impact that their endeavors have on our lives. So join us as we adventure beyond the transaction and explore the remarkable journey of Dan Johnson and his one-of-a-kind kiosk. Welcome, Dan. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I'd love to hear about your early days.
Started in that first lockdown, I think it was 2020. Very much a hobby at first. Filling my days inside with browsing and trawling the internet for things that I love and I've always sort of had an appreciation for, and admittedly probably buying too many of those things. And that then led to the idea to sort of offer a curated selection of those products in a store setting, starting mainly online at first and then now sort of progressing through to like a proper retail store, which has been a really sort of exciting step in that process.
And are you Auckland based? Is that where you're from?
Yeah, I've been in Auckland for sort of 7 or 8 years now, but originally just down south from Hamilton. So yeah, made the trip up for my studies and have not looked back since then.
How did Kiosk get its name?
The name was something that we toyed around with for a long time. Me and my brother were sort of coming up with different ideas, and we really wanted it to be something just quite simple and not too frivolous or over the top. And it was actually him, Heath, that came up with the name Kiosk. Very simple, punchy. I loved it. And yeah, we sort of rolled with that. I never sort of feel like I think too much about like the deep meaning behind the name itself. But yeah, I love the idea of sort of.
But it works.
It works well, I think.
Yeah.
And just the simplicity. Kiosk is such sort of an iconic sort of form and something you see around a lot. And I like the idea of sort of playing a bit of a twist on that. A kiosk that sells sort of very cool vintage stuff. Sounds like a dream, yeah.
So how, you mentioned your brother, how involved is he?
So he's always been helping me along the way with sort of imagery and graphic design and bits and pieces like that. And then just recently with the opening of our new retail space, he's been working there a couple of days a week as well. So it's really cool to be able to work together. We both have very similar interests, very similar sort of style, and sort of what we like. So it's always good to have someone to sort of bounce ideas off. I think at times that can be a tricky thing, is being a one-man show. It's hard to sort of make those decisions and sort of feel always really confident in those choices. So it's kind of super helpful to have someone you trust sort of alongside, just to sort of, I guess, get that confirmation or just get that second opinion.
And I saw that you have, your bachelor's degree was in architecture, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And so do you see that playing through today? Is that kind of where you led to, or?
Yeah, definitely that was sort of an eye-opening time to the sort of furniture realm and sort of that side of things. A lot of my sort of the first pieces I really got into were designed by sort of some of the best architects, and often those two go hand in hand. It's something that I think it really paved the way for sort of just that keen eye for design and just sort of seeing those little details.
And then how did you make that, just backing up even further, it's like, how did you even make the choice to go into architecture?
It's always been something I've been interested in. Yeah, when I sort of went to study, I actually did a different degree first, a communications degree. Lots of words and writing wasn't exactly for me. So architecture was always sort of my plan A, and for some reason I decided not to go ahead with that. But then that sort of
drew you back in.
Yeah, drew me back in.
Nice.
And sort of got the ball rolling again, which was good, and I'm really glad that happened.
Curious to know, did you have some sort of creative undercurrent present in your life?
Yeah, definitely. My mum is a sort of drama teacher by trade, so I've always been involved in the arts. I guess the creative side of actual design is what really enticed me more, even during the studies. And when I was sort of toying around with this idea of Kiosk, that was sort of just like, go for it.
And you kind of brought this up earlier. I want to move on to the relationships and collaboration aspect. Not only personally, your brother's involved, and so that relationship's great, as you described, but more of sourcing pieces locally. One of the best parts of Kiosk's story, from my perspective, is that how it's grown from this hobby to a full-time business, and that's mostly due to word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
And forging those relationships.
Yeah, very much so. It's sort of from the get-go, I always wanted it to be sort of driven by community and word of mouth, like you say. We've never sort of pumped money into advertising, anything crazy like that. I kind of think the designs should speak for themselves and have that natural draw, which is hopefully what's sort of being conveyed through the store. And I think for me, it's just so much more exciting when those connections are formed somewhat naturally, whether it's sort of connections with customers and the community around that, or connections with different dealers around the country, and sort of bouncing ideas between dealers, or bouncing products between each other that we think, you'd love this, you'd love this, and it's always back and forth like that. And it's so cool to sort of grow that network and sort of see where it ends up.
I think it's a universal truth that businesses rely on those relationships. Moving into even further creative businesses, it's essential. Curious to know if you feel that on the forefront.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's, like you say, super important for creative businesses, because especially, again, sort of going back to that sort of just being one person doing it, you need other people to inspire you, to sort of bounce ideas off. And a lot of my peers, they're in the creative industry, but they're doing different things. But you're drawing inspiration from all these different sort of fields and different areas of work.
It's interesting because you can have this great passion for these creative endeavors, in your case, furniture and design objects, but you also have to be really a great person as well. You have to be, you have to get along with such a variety of people in order to make it a business, because as you illustrated, it starts off as a hobby. It's interesting that it's not, you might have the best idea, but it really can't put food on the table.
Exactly.
if you're not balancing all these other things that are going on. Yeah,
no, it's so true. And I think that's been sort of one of the really nice steps of going into a proper sort of retail spot, is that sort of connection is sort of instant now, where I'm sort of meeting and chatting with people right away. Whereas in the past, when you're dealing with online, it's more a trickle-down effect, They'll send you a message, they might purchase something, arrange a time to come and collect it, and then you're sort of having that face-to-face interaction. Both are great, but I love just sort of when that's sort of straight from the get-go. You can really sort of chat and sort of, I feel like I just like brain drop all the information I know about the piece on the person, and it's probably a little bit much sometimes. But
then you're an expert. You know your product and you know it well. And I think a great testament to that is setting up this podcast. Everyone's like, oh, who's the guest? Who's the guest? I'm like, oh, Dan from Kiosk. And no matter who I tell, they're like, oh, I know someone who's done something. And even Josh here, he's like, I think I bought a piece or something,
Cool.
So it's like, it is, that's a huge testament to you.
And that's so, like, that's when I really get like the warm fuzzies, when I like, someone's like, what do you do? And I mentioned the brand, and they're like, they know about it, and sort of have a friend who's bought something, or sort of bring up something they think's really awesome. And it's like, there's nothing better than that, really.
So you get your pieces from 3 different channels. How would you say you treat each relationship? Yeah,
it can be a tricky balance, because it very much started with the vintage as the focus, and I think it still is the focus at this stage. But sort of as things progressed, I really wanted to push that sort of New Zealand design side of things as well, and work with sort of local makers. And then again, there's always those sort of iconic brands that I've appreciated for years that I kind of also wanted to include in the mix. And luckily, I think there's quite a good harmony between those 3 that works really well. But it is a tricky balance sometimes to find sort of what, I guess, from business side, where to focus and put the money and where to invest the time and different things, and sort of, yeah, can be a bit of a guessing game for me, but
it's an everyday
hopefully
learning.
It's working. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I browse Kiosk's online store and your Instagram, and one that just I can't shake is like an Air New Zealand serving tray or something,
yes.
and you see the emblem like embossed, or I don't know the technical term, of course, but for me, that's how I see Kiosk kind of thing, is that when that vintage local.
Yeah, and I love that sort of connection to a local sort of brand that's sort
in
of
a very subtle way.
Yeah,
like,
very subtle.
You would only know if you know.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that, actually. I just had a lady come to the store the other day who's like, I'm just looking for any vintage Air New Zealand things, like let me know. So I've got to start hunting down some more of that.
Cool, right. How would that even happen? Like somebody else gets it and then you get it from them?
Yeah, it's tricky because I'm sourcing things all in New Zealand, like the vintage side of things. It is a lot harder to source specific products because there's only sort of a finite number of things in the market here. If you sort of look overseas, there's really anything available. It's just sort of the price you pay, I guess. It kind of goes both ways. Like I'll go search through all my user auction channels and online searches, and then I'll also sort of message a bunch of dealers being like, got anything like this? And it's sort of, I guess, using all the sort of means at your disposal to try and get that product you want.
Right.
And usually it sort of works out.
For some reason, I'm also envisioning back in maybe the early days, you're going to like estate sales. Yeah,
it's always interesting. I think especially with things like estate sales and like big auctions like that, you can kind of see the different pieces that person's sort of collected over their life. And sometimes they might just have like an insane collection, all really great stuff. Sometimes it might be just one thing, sort of a diamond in the rough that they might have picked up that's a little bit left field, but for me it's sort of right on the money. A lot of it is the unknown, and it is a bit of a gamble. For example, doing sort of like the rounds of op shops, you could go on one day, just swing by quickly one op shop, and there'll be something waiting there, boom, ready to go. It's just luck. But then another day you could set aside a whole morning. I'm going to go to all my favorite spots, 5 or 6 different stores, nothing, so it's really just such one of those things that you can't chase. It's sort of, sometimes it just sort of comes into your path and you can just take that opportunity when it pops up. But it's always, I guess it's always the thing, like if you're searching for something, it's so much harder to find, and then when you don't want it, then it's there. So you do have a few favorite op shops that you peek into every now and then? Definitely, yeah. Admittedly, Auckland is a tricky one. I find, generally op shopping outside of Auckland is a lot better, just because people in Auckland are probably just on it a little bit more.
Yeah, they want to keep it. They're like, oh, I know this could be something. A
lot more people here sort of sifting through things. But I find like real small towns, when I go and sort of pick stuff up further down south in the North Island, always just stop at all those little towns into all the op shops, and there's sometimes some real gems.
You never know, you might find something.
It's dangerous, actually. Yeah. I was just in Melbourne a few months ago, and I only took carry-on luggage, which I regretted sort of almost instantly, not being able to bring back all the little bits that I found. But it's exciting either way, track things down like that.
And I would love to just hear about how it's been at your most recent pop-up that's still going on.
Yeah, I guess it's always been balance of the two. From the early days, it was very much predominantly online. I sort of had a little bit of a showroom that was sort of open by appointment, just for, I guess, that final step in the sales process. With furniture, you kind of, if you're buying a chair, you sort of want to sit down on it first, give it a bit of a test run. So that's obviously something that I've always wanted to expand more, and sort of have that sort of space where people can come and actually try the stuff in person. And that's been really great. In the last couple of weeks, we've opened up this new spot. And it's nice, I think, because I can do the best I can with capturing sort of every angle or all the little nice details in imagery for the online sort of website, but it's never quite the same as sort of seeing it in person and that tangible quality that you get. So I think having someone come into the store is like, I don't know, it feels super, super special, and it's like shows that they're interested in what you're doing, and that's kind of like the biggest compliment that you can get. So I'm really stoked with how it's going so far. And I think it's something that I probably have approached a little bit too loosely, like maybe not thinking through the numbers and everything so much and just kind of diving in. because it's tricky for a small business to like actually have those overheads going every week. And I can see why sort of there's quite a big shift in a lot of the sort of regular strips around Auckland. Like Ponsonby, those smallest sort of niche stores are going, and you're getting the sort of usual big chain stores going in, which is a shame, but it's also very understandable with sort of the costs and I guess the current buying trends in New Zealand. It seems to have slowed down a little bit. But again, I think for something like Kiosk and a lot of other small businesses, having that physical store can create sort of a bit of a hub and sort of strengthens that community vibe, which I think ultimately will outweigh the sort of maybe the stresses of actually paying for a space like that in the long term.
And that's great that you say that, because it's not only an essential for your product, but you're also seeing it from the perspective it's essential for the community. It's essential for the longevity of the business rather than just one product functionally needing to be sat on.
Yeah, definitely. Always a big shift, I guess, in the last couple of years, like people like brick and mortar retail sort of dying out. But I think that's couldn't be more wrong, you know. You can't compete with sort of going into a space that's been fully curated and designed by a brand and sort of just trying to lay out their ideas, and you can feel it when you sort of get there, you know. And that's something that I think can never be sort of overtaken by sort of just visiting a website. It's just never quite the same.
Completely agree. And I think what ties in is something that I read a few years ago that kind of changed my whole perspective, which is really, sounds dramatic. It's really simple. It's every dollar you spend is a dollar towards the world you want to live in. It didn't really radicalize my way of thinking, but it turned the subconscious actions that I do into very conscious decisions.
I think that's so true. And I think especially with sort of the things that I'm selling as well, you're paying, I guess, a premium on sort of what a lot of people would sort of think is standard for sort of furniture in New Zealand, because it's sort of vintage and sort of often one-offs in the sort of markets and things like that. So you kind of need that physical space in a sense. It's sort of seems a little bit on the nose if you're sort of claiming all the great value of these things, but then people can't even come and like try it out, you know. It doesn't quite work. More sort of my eyes peeled, what's next, it's kind of part of the excitement of it, I guess. And it is quite funny, the perception around some of the vintage things. Like I feel like it's quite obvious, well, I try to make it relatively obvious that they are sort of vintage designs, but sort of almost weekly I'll get people sort of wanting to order like quantities of things, or like, can I get this in a different color? It's like, no, like that's not really how this works, but it's cool, you know. It's obviously showing that people are interested in the product, and I guess it ties in well with the idea that I'm trying to sort of source things that feel quite timeless and contemporary. So the fact that people think they're sort of a new product that they can buy different colors in, I guess means that that's somewhat working. Aside from sort of like the history of the piece themselves, where they came from, sort of the maker and all that, there's such a cool connection to like history and sort of that flow through of its past life. And I always like the idea of sort of finding things a new home, you know, for the next 50 years. They've been sort of traveling through their life last 50 years, jumping all over the place, different owners. But it's nice when you sort of sell something to someone and you can tell that they're gonna really care about it, and it actually means a little bit more than just a chair or a sofa or something like that to them. Have
you ever had that kind of scenario where you've been driving through and you see a piece on the side of the road for collection and you're like, wait a minute?
I can't say I have personally, but I've had a few people who message me like pictures of things being like, I saw this, and then obviously like usually when they go, it's gone. You got to be pretty quick, I think, because it's not a super common thing in New Zealand. And it's interesting you say that, because there's definitely been a shift since I've opened the retail space. The online sales have sort of dropped a little bit, and then the in-person sales have increased. So I think it shows people do value that as sort of the final step in the process. Like you say, a lot of people do their research online, and then sort of when they want to actually pull the trigger, that in-person sort of final step is quite a nice touch. And hopefully long-term both will sort of pick up, but you know, for now I can't. Like, beggars can't be choosers, so yeah.
You've talked already a little bit about this, but if there's anything you want to add, has there been any feedback in the retail space that has been like, wow, I never thought Kiosk came off like that?
I think a lot of people, the scale of things, that's the first thing I sort of think of. Often it's hard to convey that online, size of different objects, also how things work together, I think that's really beneficial in sort of a retail space, because I try and sort of add some sort of context into the online imagery, but it's never quite the same when you can see sort of a little bit of a setting put together around a piece with a few different elements that you'd usually see, sort of chair, side table, lamp, or something like that, and sort of how those things play in together. And also, I guess, the mixing of those sort of three categories, the sort of vintage, and then the sort of contemporary New Zealand designers, and then sort of some of those sort of smaller, iconic sort of international brands. When people can sort of see them working together in person, I think that's sort of when the magic really happens. I'm always of the opinion that if you have a whole house sort of filled with vintage design from the 70s, it's going to look like a house from the 70s, and it's not going to look very good.
That's not timeless.
No, that's not timeless. That's sort of trapped in a bubble in time. But yeah, sort of when you pick and choose your sort of favorites from different eras and different designers, different colors, styles, and sort of that's when you get your real personal sort of eclectic style that's sort of only for you. And that's sort of something that I think it's sort of more easy for customers to sort of begin that process in sort of a physical store.
You do have these three distinct channels, but it's not one or the other. This dependency and interconnectedness that you might not think of.
Definitely. And I think that's all of the sort of coolest interiors I find. It's always just such an eclectic mix, and there's no sort of, it's not categorized by one style, you know? It's always a bit chaotic. And sort of like Apartmento magazine's a great reference. They have sort of beautiful imagery of sort of very lived-in environments in the homes of sort of artistic people and creatives, and it's so that sort of sense of realness, I think, is something that can be hard to achieve in sort of interior design, because as soon as you go for the full modern look, it looks very sleek, it looks very, very nice, like admittedly, but it can lose its sort of the soul of it a little bit.
Yeah, personality.
And the personality.
Yeah.
Whereas I find, you know, some people say there's all these grand rules around, you know, not using this color with this color or not using this texture with this texture. I really don't care about any of that.
I love it.
I think you just got to buy what you love and what you sort of have a connection to.
Well, that's it.
Such a cool
Dan,
style.
like I'll say it for you. That's why Kiosk is working. Anybody could copy and paste your business model, but it comes to like you have that eye. I wanted to move on to more of your decision making and your learnings over the past 3 years. Obviously, it's grown to a full-time business. We've kind of alluded to you don't usually take the logistical route. I was just wondering if there's anything more you'd like to say about that.
I am really not a business mind, so approaching this, it's very much driven by the products and sort of the passion behind it, rather than sort of the number side of things. As things have grown, though, it's been something that I've really had to think about a lot and trying to sort of get it working for me. Still very much a work in progress in sort of that area, but I almost want to continue in that sort of same mindset and try not to be driven by the numbers. And sort of obviously it is a business, so that's has to be a key part of it.
Yeah, essentially it sounds like you are striking that great balance. How would you see the decisions that you make? Yeah,
the decision making can be tricky, because often there's like tons of products that I would love to sort of get into the store, but it's one of those things that it's really can be quite risky whether people actually want them or not. And I'm not sort of doing any crazy like analytics on sort of what people are buying, for example. So it often is just kind of a little bit of a stab in the dark in many cases. In saying that, I sort of don't really try and follow the trends so much, because I think that can sort of spiral out of control a little bit if you sort of just go trend, and then it feels like you're sort of changing up your identity quite a lot in that sense. So far, it's very much just driven by things that I think are sort of going to last well, they're going to be timeless, and it's not going to be something that's in fashion now, out of fashion in 6 months' time, and then sort of getting thrown out. That's kind of like the worst case scenario in sort of my opinion.
What would you say your turnover average is?
That is quite like it varies
all
really.
Over.
Yeah, really all over. Like the smaller, newer products have quite a good turnover, you know, those. But with the vintage pieces, in the early days, I was really bad at that. I would just keep things for like, I've still got things now that I bought day one, and I just like love them, and I'm like don't want to give them away, which is probably not the best mindset to have. I'm
curious on your decision making, because I could see it so easily being a creative yourself, just starting to collect everything that you find that you love, and then it just gets to a point of, wait, we need to get things out the door.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But I guess, at some stage you can get to that point where you are having that healthy turnover, that you are collecting your own pieces.
Yeah, and I think a huge part of what dictates what I'm buying is sort of how much space I have available to me. So at the moment I'm quite lucky because I've got sort of the warehouse on Cross Street and then the sort of retail store at the block. So I can have sort of quite a curated selection in the sort of retail store. Then I've just got tons of storage in the back end for all the sort of extra bits and pieces. A bit of a double-edged sword. It means like I've got a lot of space, but it also means I can probably buy too much stuff, which can be a bit dangerous to the accounts and to just my general sanity in terms of managing it all. But yeah, I've been liking having the retail store for the reason where it's really sort of highlight sort of key pieces, and you feel like you're sort of displaying them in sort of more of a curated way rather than just sort of it feeling like storage a lot of the time. But it's one of those things, because sort of everything's sourced in New Zealand, that vintage side of things, I can't really miss like opportunities if something comes up. So I really sort of need to be constantly looking, like 24/7 almost is like true, because if something comes up and you miss it, then I just like kick myself for ages.
Is there anything like would make Kiosk more successful?
Yeah, as much as I hate to say it, like the money side of the things is probably the largest like limiting factor. There's a lot of cool brands I would love to work with, but I guess being in New Zealand, the isolation here means it can be quite tricky, firstly to get the stuff here, and that sort of ensues quite a large cost, but also just sort of knowing if people will actually respond well to it in this market here. We can't really just like copy what people are doing overseas just because it's on such a different scale that something that, might be super successful in sort of Europe and in America, you bring it here, and where there might be 50 customers there, there'll be like one or two, in that sort of sliding scale of things here.
Yeah. Do you ever think you will spend money on hard marketing or advertising?
It probably will be something that I do need to do. That sort of natural growth and word of mouth, I guess, can only take you to a certain level. Even with like marketing, I'm not just doing your usual sort of paid Instagram ads, paid Facebook ads, trying to do something a little bit more unique. What that is, I'm not entirely sure of yet.
I might be thinking way too ahead of myself, but I can see us sitting down 2 years from now having this conversation and seeing where Kiosk is.
Yeah.
And, those new decisions that you'll have to make as the business grows. There's no right or wrong answer. Nobody can tell you how to run your business. Kiosk seems so on brand, intertwined with you personally. Would you say the same?
Yeah, I like to think so. It's really like all the stuff that I would buy if I have all the money in the world,
Yeah.
So yeah.
The first question I'd love to ask you, Dan. Creative business. What does that mean to you?
I guess a business that's driven from like a creative sense rather than sort of focusing on the money and sort of profits from the get-go. I feel like a lot of my peers and stuff these days, when they think of business, they're thinking about that sort of entrepreneur mindset where it's how can we make money fast? Doesn't matter what the industry is, doesn't matter what the product is. It's sort of driven by getting that growth super quickly and trying to sort of level things up super quickly, whereas they're not sort of stopping to think about the actual, I guess, reason for starting a brand like that, or if they actually have any expertise or actually anything to give to that new market. And I think that's where it kind of gets a bit tricky, because you can see a lot of, like, there's tons of cool brands being started, but sometimes I think sort of too many. I guess one example I always think of is like the RTD cans. There seems to be like a new one coming out every week. And that's not to say they're not good, but it's like, are these people all passionate about, mixing drinks? Probably yes, but like, yeah. So yeah, I think for me, creative business needs to be driven by the creative idea behind why you actually want to get into that area.
I love that your definition is quite open-ended. A lot of people will try to put parameters on creative business, which is so ironic.
Yeah, I think you can be creative with anything, right? Like, it doesn't have to be tied to like those sort of usual creative fields. Well, yeah, when I think of creative business, I think of someone doing a business in a creative way that's going to be successful, rather than doing a business in a creative area that's already sort of happening. If you're doing something unique in an existing market, that's ultimately going to be way more successful. Because you're going to stand out sort of from the get-go.
Are there any other creative pursuits that you're interested in?
Not really seriously. I love, I've always loved sort of clothing and sort of the fashion side of things. And I feel like fashion design and sort of product design sort of do go relatively hand in hand. And this, I guess, recently as well, this sort of huge crossover between those two markets. But yeah, like I said before, I sort of used to work at Crane Brothers, so really got a cool understanding of like proper tailoring and construction and how that all works. I'd love to explore something in that sort of field down the line. Maybe not as a fashion designer, but sort of incorporate something like that into the Kiosk brand or something. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Or even combining the two. Like recently I've been trying to hunt down old like army parachutes because they have a beautiful texture and really cool like pastel colors a lot of the time. And yeah, like just seeing sort of how I can use sort of those old textiles and sort of make them into a usable product now. I think it's quite an interesting sort of idea and sort of quite a sustainable approach to, yeah, sort of reusing those textiles. So
are those parachutes from New Zealand Army, or are you sourcing from everywhere?
Yeah, most I've found in New Zealand are New Zealand Army, but there's not that many of them, to be honest. I'm not sure how much actual parachuting the New Zealand Army's doing. Those textiles that have sort of a past and like you've got someone who's written on it in Sharpie, like their name or their unit number, I think it's just so cool when you get those little details. It's really cool.
So how's your sewing skills? Sewing
skills are getting there. I've got a sewing machine that I use somewhat regularly.
Nice.
But it's usually just for personal projects that don't end up being that well finished, but they kind of do the job. It's a trend that's happening sort of in the furniture industry as well, right? I guess the main example would be someone like Tom Sachs. I feel like a lot of his early work started as like found objects around New York City that he would combine into these like art pieces. And then nowadays I follow sort of a lot of sort of little workshops in the US and all over really that their whole business is just finding like scrap materials and producing them into furniture or usable objects that people think are really cool and are actually going to be used and like super durable. Yeah, it's such an interesting idea, sort of the reuse of old materials to create like a one-of-one object, because you get that personal connection that you just can't get anywhere else, I think.
And that kind of ties into something we talked about earlier, which is that functionality versus beauty. Do you see them as equal? Is it a give and take?
I think it can be different for everyone, you know. Right. Ultimately, like furniture needs to be functional to a certain degree, but you can really push those boundaries pretty far. Some of my favorite pieces are very much sculpture side heavy compared to function side heavy. But yeah, I think if you have the balance of the two, like I sort of keep saying, mixing sort of the two styles together, it's going to ultimately be sort of more interesting. Everyone loves sort of a chair in the corner for all their sort of odd jackets and clothes. So, you know, if you've got a sculptural chair, use it for that. Yeah. You know, that spot. Yeah, can work really well both ways.
Where are your sources of inspiration? Are they local? Are they international? Mix of both?
Yeah, I think it's always a mix of both, but I do draw most inspiration probably from the past. Yeah, I've just got like really cool like vintage like interior books. I sort of go deep dives of like old catalogs online. I think I try and be inspired, by people that aren't sort of happening right now, because it feels like you're just sort of replicating something that's already being done in a sense. Whereas if you sort of look backwards, it feels like you're sort of drawing from something that's, I don't know, a little bit more unique, and it can feel a bit more special in that sense. But yeah, I don't know, inspiration's all over really. Lots of like the local designers I work with, just such creative, cool guys, always inspired by them. But then you can look sort of different stores overseas and see what they're doing, and that's sort of huge inspiration, seeing how sort of something can scale up and work in sort of a way bigger environment than sort of what I'm operating in. In New Zealand as well, I think when people think of vintage, they think instantly of Scandinavian vintage, which is all the wooden sideboards and sort of wooden armed sofas and stuff like that. So it's quite funny actually when I tell people what I do often and say like I run a vintage store, what they're picturing in their head usually is like way off what it actually is. And when I show them some pictures, quite cool to not sort of be categorized in that way and really just follow what's good design rather than what's from a specific era or from a specific location. And sort of, it goes back to that mixing and matching of different things, I think is where it sort of all comes together really nicely.
Is there anything that kind of, inspires you to do your work?
For me, it's like old like movies and cartoons. Like I'm a little bit obsessed with like Tintin. That sort of, I guess, partly where my love for sort of colours comes in. I would love to sort of think that I live my life like a cartoon character. That's like how I try and base my outfits off as well, like look like a sort of out of a cartoon. But no, like really like old movies where you can kind of see a lot of these cool like just things in action. I just rewatched like 2001: A Space Odyssey the other day, and like writing a shopping list as I was sort of so many cool chairs, and like even the cutlery they use is just like so cool. Especially with interiors, you can kind of draw inspiration from almost any sort of content you see because everyone's in an environment, right? I think generally, like sort of, I'm very much in the mindset you just kind of got to go with what you like, and if you really like want like a chartreuse wall on your house, go for it. You know, you can make it work. I think in terms of color in general in New Zealand, it's quite funny to see the shift. Hoping the shift towards use of more color again nationally in New Zealand. Very minimal interiors, quite neutral tones has really sort of been dominating for the last sort of 5-10 years even. But it can get a little bit boring, I think, and it doesn't need to be everything colorful. It just needs to be like a few little dots here and there. I think that can look really awesome. Think about it like a lot of the vintage Braun products. They would have very clean sort of neutral tones, but then they would use color to highlight the points of function, so you could just look at it and see, this is how I turn it on and off, this is how I do this adjustment, just dictated by the little, I guess, pops of color. And kind of when you take that sort of thinking and apply it to sort of an interior setting, it kind of is quite a cool way of thinking about it as well. Yeah,
it's amazing how we're on the subconscious level of know how to turn on something just because of the color, and like maybe the icon as well, but exactly. It's just that unspoken language that your mind just processes. It is the power of color, not only what we personally might be more attracted to. Everybody has their favorite color, right? We should have started this podcast. What's your favorite color?
With that sort of shift from sort of the very neutral to more colorful, we're kind of in that middle period at the moment where brands are trying to do the best of both, which is like they're going colorful but they're going super pastel-y, and it's kind of these quite muted tones. Like Cartel, for example, sort of their current editions of all the Componibles, all sort of pastel-y tones, whereas they should just do them in the vintage colors because they look so much better, like bold red, yellow, you know.
They're taking the safe option.
They're taking the safe option.
But it's actually doing worse because it's not safe because you're not taking that step into it.
And it's kind of trying to appeal to both parties in the masses, like you say, Whereas if they sort of were bold with their identity and like, this is our sort of history, this is what we sort of built our business on, is these really punchy colors mixed in with like great functional design, that's what they should be championing, because that's ultimately, you know, I think what sort of gives the brand value.
Exactly. They're doing a disservice to themselves by not being an authentic way with their brand story. They're just picking these colors because they're like, we want to try and say that we're doing it, but we don't really, you know, they don't have the meat to back it up, essentially. And
then sort of changing each season, you know, different things. Like with fashion, that's sort of understandable, different things each season. But with furniture, I think you can sort of make a decision and can kind of stick with it, you know. And if you've made the right decision, it should work, for years to come,
In terms of the Kiosk brand, which is obviously quite neutral, black and white, but then it's the colour that comes from the furniture and the actual products that you've got in store.
Definitely, and that's we've toyed around with using certain colours in the logo, but what I found is like I was just wanting to change the colour like every couple of months. I could do a little yellow one, then I'd be like, oh, next time I'm doing a little like business cards or a little poster or something, I'd be like, oh, it actually looks quite good in red. So I think like you say, we've sort of gone now with that sort of neutral colour palette for the branding more so, and then sort of the imagery of the actual products is what sort of brings the colour out.
I was going to say, it's interesting though, because you're using that imagery, you could use any of those colours with the Kiosk brand and it would be recognisable, because I think your products are so vibrant and forward-facing that you've built those colours into your brand.
Definitely sort of how we want it to work, so that's perfect,
So I know it was a bit of a joke earlier, but what is your favourite colour?
That's
today.
Today. I think that's the key. Today, I'm feeling an orange day today, as you may be able to tell. I'm always between orange, red, and yellow.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, Dan, for coming in. And of course, thank you all for listening. You know what to do. Check out Skies on the social pages, and we'll be back next time to discuss more about the creative people and businesses shaping Aotearoa. But until then, Dan, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Yes, we're open at the block on Normanby Road for the next couple of months, so come by and see us there. I'll be there a few days, so come have a chat and I'll talk your ear off about all things furniture. Otherwise, yeah, you can find us online or on Instagram. Send me a message anytime and I would love to chat.
Awesome. Yes, everyone go follow Kiosk_store on Instagram. And wrapping up, I'm Katie Baldwin. This was an episode of Beyond the Transaction. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. See you later. Peace.